Hello, IB Biology students. This is Miss Sheely with your last installment of this year's video notes. We're going to be talking about Chapter 6, Unit 6, Hormones, Homeostasis, and Reproduction today. So the first thing we want to talk about when we talk about homeostasis is just remembering the terminology. Homeostasis is, of course, maintaining that internal environment in our bodies and keeping everything within a safe limit. And typically, when we're talking about human homeostasis, we're talking mainly about our blood flow and different tissue flows. We've talked about a few things throughout the year, and we'll talk about some more of these next year and in this unit, this video lecture today. So water balance we've talked about before. This is the idea of osmoregulation, that 90% of your blood volume is water, and of course we know that if you have water loss, then you become dehydrated. So dehydration comes with water loss. You'll talk about that more next year when you go into kidneys as well. Carbon dioxide concentration, we just covered that earlier in this unit with breathing and heart rate, and you'll go into that again some more with kidneys next year. Body temperature, this is the idea of keeping your body temperature regulated. This is called thermoregulation. And so if you're too hot, your vessels will vasodilate and you will sweat to cool yourself off. So that evaporation we talked about earlier in the year. And then if you are too cold, then your vessels will vasoconstrict, or your vessels will constrict, and then you will shiver to try and warm up that muscle movement to try and raise that temperature. Today, we're going to talk about blood glucose concentration, and that's the next couple of slides, and that involves your pancreas and your liver and two hormones called insulin and glucagon. And then we've talked a little bit about blood pH with circulation, breathing, and heart rate, but you'll get into that a little bit more when you talk about kidneys next year as well. All right, so blood glucose. Blood glucose is the level of glucose or sugars in your blood, and this is maintained through actions in the pancreas and the liver working together, okay? So if your blood sugar is too high, okay, so if your blood sugar is too high, then that signal will stimulate some cells in your pancreas called beta cells. And these beta cells will then release insulin. And when they release insulin, that tells the fat cells to take glucose from the blood. So we'll take the blood sugar from the blood in the liver, and we will store it in the form of glycogen. If your blood sugar is too low, that will stimulate a different set of cells in the pancreas called alpha cells. And the alpha cells, because your blood sugar level is too low, will secrete a hormone called glucagon. And this glucagon will take the glycogen that we've stored and it will chop it up into glucose, and then that will be able to be released into your blood system. Okay, all this information and these pictures were taken from this website, this MedMovie website. I just want to take you there if you want to explore that on your own. All right, and this will take us into types of diabetes, but this is the website. You can see here there's some things with insulin resistance and diabetes, but that is our next slide, this idea of insulin. All right, so diabetes. So diabetes is a disease that's related to your blood sugar. It's actually the reduced ability to control blood glucose through insulin levels. So remember that insulin will allow us to take the high blood sugar, high blood glucose levels and store that glucose as glycogen. So there's two different types. There's type 1, which happens earlier in life, and type 2, which typically happens as you age or in your adult years. In type 1, the early onset, there's actually a very weak relationship to a hereditary cause. Typically, you need a trigger like an illness. And what happens is during this illness or with this trigger, your beta cells have been destroyed. And because those beta cells are destroyed, the insulin production stops. If there's not enough insulin, then we cannot take that blood glucose out of the blood and store it as glycogen. Excuse me. In type 2, adult onset, there's a very strong relationship with a hereditary link. This is typically related to obesity and poor diet, though. And the problem here, your your pancreas is still producing insulin, so you're not having a problem having insulin, but the problem is that you don't have as many receptors in your liver to take that insulin and then tell your liver what to do. And so what happens is you become less sensitive to insulin, or insulin does not work well in your body. So in this case, it wouldn't do any good to get insulin pumped into your blood. You already make enough insulin. So that is why type 2 or adult onset diabetes is really controlled with diet. Whereas type 1, because you're not producing insulin, you can be treated with just insulin injections. All right, so now we're going to move into some other hormones that are involved. So the next one is called thyroxine or thyroxine. You'll see it either way. And this is a hormone that regulates your body's metabolic rate. All cells in the body are targets of this hormone, but the main focus of this hormone is really the liver, the muscle, and the brain. Now, thyroxine is very unique in that it, here's the molecular structure over here, and that it has places for iodine to bind in 4 places. And that is very unique for hormones in our body. So what happens with thyroxine is that if your body temperature decreases, this will trigger your thyroid to produce thyroxine, and this will stimulate heat production, which will then, of course, cause your body temperature to rise. What happens if you have a thyroxine deficiency? Well, that's called hypothyroidism, and you'll have many different symptoms. You'll have a lack of energy and be tired all the time, be very forgetful and depressed, have a weight gain despite having a loss of appetite. This means you're absolutely not hungry, but you are still gaining weight. Feel very cold all the time, you're constipated, and if this happens in children, then they can have impaired brain development. So thyroxine is going to help with both that body temperature and your metabolic rate. All right, another hormone is leptin. Leptin is a protein hormone that's secreted by your fat cells or adipose cells. And the concentration in your blood of leptin is controlled by the amount of food or the type of food that you intake and the amount of fat tissue or adipose tissue in your body. So as leptin binds to receptors in the hypothalamus, this will cause appetite inhibition. So the more leptin you have in your body, that will then trigger the hypothalamus or react with the hypothalamus and then cause you to stop eating. So if you eat a very fatty meal, or if you have a lot of fat tissue, then your body should with this leptin and hypothalamus reaction, be able to stop you from eating and tell you you're not hungry anymore, and so then you take in less calories. So they did a study with mice, and they found that these 2 mice over here, that one was a healthy mouse that had no problems, and this one obese mouse, they found that he had a leptin defect, which caused him not to produce leptin, and thus he became very obese. And what they found with this obese mouse that had a leptin defect is that when they injected him with leptin, that he lost weight and became very healthy. So does that lead you to think, well, should we inject obese people with leptin? Would that help our obesity problem here in the United States in particular? Well, in 1995, a study was done that actually showed that patients that had a high dose of leptin, so they gave patients a range from a placebo all the way up to a high dose, and those patients that were on the high dose did see an average weight loss of more body mass, but it was not significantly higher than the weight loss over the placebo group. And any body mass that was lost was then regained as soon as the trial was ended. The problem is that most obese humans, they actually have high amounts of leptin in their blood, and the problem is more like the type 2 diabetes, where our target cells in the hypothalamus are resistant to that leptin. So even though we're producing all this leptin that should be telling our bodies that we're not hungry and we need to stop eating, those receptors are not there for that message to be received. All right, a third hormone is melatonin, and melatonin is really important with your circadian rhythms. And circadian rhythms depend on two groups of cells, the suprachiasmatic nuclei, abbreviated and called the SCNs for short. And these guys control the release of melatonin by the pineal gland to keep that circadian rhythm up. So melatonin is essentially causing your sleep-wake cycle. Interestingly enough, your jet lag, if you do travel typically over different time zones or definitely overseas, jet lag is caused by these SCNs that are still trying to keep the circadian rhythm. So it's been shown that if you do get some sleep right away or you take some melatonin over the counter, that can help reduce the amount of jet lag that you have. But over time, even if you don't do that over a few days, your body will get back into its normal circadian rhythm. All right, so now we're going to switch gears, kind of leave the hormones a little bit. Hormones are involved in this next section as well, but we're going to switch gears towards the reproductive system. So we've talked about sex determination in terms of genetics before, the XX chromosome, of course, being denoting a female, and the XY chromosome denoting a male. Well, on that Y chromosome, we've also talked about a gene called the SRY gene before. And sex determination as far as development is really key with whether this SRY gene is present. So like I said, if it is present because it's located on the Y chromosome, the embryonic gonads will then develop into testes. And this gene, it codes for a protein, a DNA binding protein called TDF, which actually stands for the testis determining factor. So if you have this gene, then you will produce this DNA binding protein, which will allow your embryonic gonads to develop into testes. Once those testes start to develop, they will start secreting testosterone, and testosterone will trigger the development of the rest of the male genitalia. In females, of course, females don't have a Y chromosome, they just have two X's. So the SRY gene is not present. And if it is not present, then the embryonic gonads will develop naturally into ovaries because there is no DNA binding protein of TDF or testis determining factor. And the rest of the female reproductive organs, they will develop in the absence of that testosterone, in the presence of the maternal estrogen and progesterone. So the mom that's carrying the child will continue to produce estrogen and progesterone throughout the pregnancy, and having those two with no testosterone is what will cause the rest of the female organs to develop. All right, so let's continue with talking about testosterone. So I just talked about this prenatal development of the male genitalia. So I'm not going to go into that again, but there's some additional information here. But male child grows and develops. Testosterone will also trigger the secondary sexual characteristics once the child hits puberty. And this includes increased aggression, increased muscle mass, pubic and body hair. Males typically grow taller than females, their voice deepens, and then of course sperm production will start, and the male will be able to procreate, and that all starts in puberty. Testosterone will also increase the male sex drive and keep sperm production constant for the rest of the male's life. And this aggression is what allowed for hunting and defense in other eras of human existence. All right, so the male reproductive system, one of the IB requirements for this topic is that you do need to be able to draw the male reproductive system. Your textbook shows you a view from both the front and the side. I think I like the drawing from the side better. I think it's easier to draw the structures and make sure you get them accurately correct. I'll be showing you that in class. All right, so the sperm's journey. The sperm starts here in the testis, or the testicle, as it's here in this picture. The testis is the more correct form. That spermatogenesis, or the formation of the sperm from that final division of meiosis. So that's going to happen in the testis, and then they will go into the epididymis, where they will mature. Once they are mature, they will be carried along this tube called the vas deferens. And along the way, they will hit the seminal vesicle, or the seminal vesicle will secrete fructose for energy for the sperm because they are on a very long traveling voyage, and also a protective mucus that will help them in traveling as well. So that'll be picked up here at the intersection of the seminal vesicle, and then here the vas deferens will join with the urethra just outside of the bladder, and it is surrounded by the prostate gland. The prostate will add additional fluids that will help to neutralize the acid in the vagina, as the vagina is a very acidic and hostile environment. And then the sperm will continue to travel through the urethra and through the penis, and finally be released through ejaculation. This website here can be a very helpful website if you want to go through this on your own. It'll take you through kind of step by step what's going on and what I just talked about, in a way to highlight each of the different structures here. All right, so that's the male reproductive system. The female reproductive system, you have 6 different structures. Again, you can draw this from a front or a side view. I think that going in from the front, or drawing this from the front, is easier to get all of your structures. Both of these images are from the front as well. So the ovary, these are the ovaries here. You have 2 ovaries. Every female has 2 ovaries that produce the eggs. They also produce the 2 hormones, estrogen and progesterone, that I talked about earlier, and we'll come back to those in a few minutes. Then from there, you have these tubes that connect to the uterus. These tubes are called oviducts. They're also called fallopian tubes, and they collect the egg at ovulation. So the egg will pop out of the ovary and go into the oviduct, and this will also typically be the site of fertilization, and these oviducts will then move the embryo to the uterus. The uterus itself provides the needs for the embryo, and then, of course, the fetus as it continues to develop during pregnancy. The cervix is at the bottom of the uterus, and this protects the fetus during pregnancy and will dilate to provide a birth canal. So dilating just means opening wider so that the fetus or the child can come out. The vagina is just below the cervix, and it will stimulate the penis and cause ejaculation and provide a birth canal for the child as well. The vagina is a very hostile environment because it is fairly open to the environment, so it's very acidic, and that's what we mean by a hostile environment. And below, and you can't see on this picture, nor do you typically have to draw the vulva, but the vulva are the skin at the base of the vagina, and these are to protect the internal parts of the female reproductive system. And this website will take you to, it's the female version of the previous website that I just showed you, and you can again look at these structures and go through. All right, so if we didn't think that females were complicated enough, we have 6 different hormones that we need to know about, 4 in particular that control the menstrual cycle, and this is something that you are expected to understand. Out of the 4 hormones that are controlling the menstrual cycle, 2 are released by or controlled by the pituitary gland, and 2 are controlled by the ovaries. And those are the 2 that I've already mentioned, the estrogen and progesterone. So you have FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone. And this hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, is going to stimulate the oocyte development, or stimulate the development of the egg. We call that an oocyte. LH, or luteinizing hormone, is going to mature the oocyte and will cause the release of the egg, or ovulation. The 2 that are released by the ovaries, estrogen, this is going to develop the endometrium, and this is the lining that is in the uterus. And this can be a positive or a negative feedback on the FSH, and we'll get into that in a few minutes as to what that means. And progesterone is going to maintain the endometrium if necessary, and that's a negative feedback. And again, we'll talk about what negative and positive feedback are. The other two, the two additional ones, the fifth and the sixth, you have HCG, which is a pregnancy hormone. So if the woman is pregnant, this will be released, and this keeps the estrogen and the progesterone levels high. And then you have oxytocin, which is a birth hormone, and that's what starts the contractions of the uterus. All right, now this over here, we're going to go into this in the next couple of pages, but I did just want to show you this. This is kind of a nice little animation. And this actually I found does not work well on the Google. So if I go in through Google, it tells me it's forbidden. But if I go in through Microsoft, it works. So this is kind of nice because you have your hormones over here, and then you have what's going on in the body here. And then you can click and see what's going on at each stage. Or you can even just play all and see. You can see the graph of the hormones as to what's happening, and as you go, what's happening down here with the uterus, the egg release, the lining built up, because there's no pregnancy, everything will be released, and you kind of start all over again. So that is a nice animation that you can use. All right, so let's go through this cycle. So this is exactly what that little site that I was just showing you tells you about. Yes, you do need to know all about these guys and these hormones, what happens exactly during the menstrual cycle in that 28-day period. The menstrual cycle is typically 28 days. It is not the same for everyone, although it is mostly the same. So in the first 4 days, we call this the follicular phase. And in this 4-day phase is when you have menstruation, and that endometrium lining of the uterus sheds or releases. During this time period, you have your follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, will increase, thus stimulating the follicle development. So you can see an increase here, how it is kind of high. Okay, follicle stimulating hormone itself doesn't ever get super high, but it is high for itself. All right, so during the 5th to 14 days, we call this the ovulatory phase. This is when FSH and the follicle stimulant the estrogen release. Okay, so now we're going to start to release estrogen, and you can see that here. So this is the 5th through the 14th day. 14 is here. So these kind of line up right here. So here's 14. So you can see that estrogen is being released as that follicle develops. The estrogen will stimulate the endometrium development. So here in the first 4 days, we've left or lost the endometrium, and now as the estrogen increases, the uterine lining increases as well. This estrogen will also stimulate this luteinizing hormone, or LH, and look at that sucker spike right up there. And once we get to that peak of LH, this is when we have ovulation, and this ovulation typically happens at day 14, a little ping, and a release of the egg. From day 14 to 18, so 14 to 18, we have a fall in luteinizing hormone. So immediately once that egg is released, that LH, or luteinizing hormone, decreases. We have a drastic drop. Then we have what's left of the egg sac area or surrounding. We have something called a corpus luteum, and that forms where the now empty follicle was within the ovary. And that corpus luteum is going to release the hormone progesterone. So here we have the corpus luteum developing, and so we have the progesterone increasing. And that's going to maintain the endometrium lining. So as progesterone stays high, our lining of our endometrium stays thick. And progesterone will maintain this, and it inhibits FSH and LH, so it keeps these guys nice and low. If no fertilization and implantation occur, then the progesterone and the estrogen will drop. You can see that here, dropping, and that will trigger the cycle to happen all over again. If fertilization and implantation do occur, then the progesterone and the estrogen will not drop, and the endometrium lining will stay high. Okay, so another idea along with this reproductive line is in vitro fertilization, or IVF. IVF is for fertilization outside the body, making sure that it can happen. This is a nice site that you can go to again, take yourself through this. All right, so here's that site, and you can click on these images, and it'll take you through some reading with some really nice pictures with some extra information. Okay. So I will put this, this is not a link that you can click on, but I will put this on Blackboard for you to be able to access. All right, so what does IVF mean? So first of all, a doctor would need to determine if the man and the woman are suitable for IVF, and if so, then we would give FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, LH, given to the female to stimulate multiple eggs to be released at one time. And so this would be a little different than a normal cycle period or menstrual cycle, where we would just have one egg being released at a time. So we're stimulating for multiple eggs to be released. Those eggs are then collected or harvested, and they are fertilized in a petri dish with the father's sperm and then incubated. So this is the IVF, or in vitro part of the fertilization process. So here, looking at our picture, we've stimulated the ovary with the hormones FSH and LH. That has made many eggs pop out, and we will harvest them, and then we will combine the egg and the sperm together and inoculate them, let them sit. And after incubation, we hopefully will have a viable or fertilized blastocyst. And so a blastocyst is a zygote that has progressed past a multicellular part. Blastocysts are typically between 8 and 16 cells. And so those blastocysts, or ablastocysts, would be selected and developed into embryos. At this point, now that we have the embryo, guidelines state that only up to 3 embryos should be selected for implantation into the uterus. Hopefully, 1 or more will take, which means they will adhere and continue to develop inside of the uterus. There is a risk of a multiple pregnancy, and typically when you see like octomoms or septuplets, this is what's happened. They have implanted, the doctors have implanted more than the 3 embryos, and they have all taken. And so after bed rest or low mobility for a month or so, a pregnancy test will be administered, and if positive, the pregnancy continues as normal. And if not, the woman can wait a few more months, and then she can attempt another cycle. This is not a super pleasant experience, but sometimes it is the only option for someone or couples that are having a difficult time getting pregnant. All right, so that's really it for today's notes. I hope you took down some questions and you bring those back to class. Look forward to seeing you there. Have a great day.